Hello, activists and aspiring activists. Welcome.
I'm Monique Kitnikon.
I'm Fantasy Bias.
And I'm Alyssa Winina.
And as we explained in our last podcast, social norms are often oppressive and limiting to marginalized people's experiences. Today, we'll be going more into depth on how you can challenge social norms that can be harmful. Your promotion of gender and social equity can shift our culture and create a more safer and more accepting community for everyone. So what are some things that y'all can think of, like expectations that have limited your experiences?
When I was a kid, I was conditioned to understand that there were certain things that boys could do, like play with cars, and certain things girls could do, like play with Barbies. I now see that this has limited my life and my experiences as a child. I wouldn't play sports and other things like that because I just thought I wasn't allowed to, that it was for boys. And whenever I did try to do things that were for boys, I would get criticized by my peers. And I now wonder what I would be like if I was born as a male. I feel like my interests would be completely different than they are now. And I also wonder what it would be like if I lived in a society that didn't have such strict gender binaries, and maybe if I didn't have limits on what I could do based on my gender, I would feel more whole in my gender expression.
Absolutely. For myself personally, race has always proven to be a limitation for me, especially in schools. I always felt that because I was Asian, I was limited to the kinds of schoolwork or school interests that I could have, especially within more creative routes. I always felt that I had to be more academic and not as focused around maybe art. And I feel that if I was given the opportunity to maybe branch out more and take interests that I would have liked to become a part of, I would have had a more broad spectrum of hobbies and interests that I would have now as from when I would experience those as a child.
Yeah, and to go off on another intersection, I've gone through some ableist expectations that through the last years that I've incorporated with my physical disabilities. And so people will overestimate me or they may underestimate me depending on how their first impression is of how I act or how I talk and just how I portray myself. They may overdo questions or helping, or some may even straight up act like I don't exist to kind of avoid the uncomfortableness or awkwardness and not knowing what to do. If I say I'm active or something of that nature, say go to physical therapy or I've done PE before, they'll be like, oh, what do you even do though? And so it's kind of limiting to me, and not only to my physical capabilities, but also to how I emotionally get and how I meant my mentality. It will be I'll kind of just shut down rather than boosting myself up or expressing myself in the way that I want to, just because of all the ableist kind of social norms that have been into play since throughout our lives.
So what are some ways that you guys or you two challenge these norms in your day-to-day lives?
For me, I definitely am trying to combat these norms to focus more on myself and what I need as an individual, and trying to be more authentic in the ways that I express myself versus expressing myself in a way that fits a stereotype just because it's convenient or because it's what's expected of me. And I definitely think that it just has to do with becoming more comfortable with oneself and being more comfortable with my race and having that be a positive intersection rather than something that limits me.
Mm-hmm. Initially, I have taught myself to kind of take a step back and make sure the person or situation where the norms come into place, make sure that they're aware of the stereotypes and the way they use them. From what I know, I am no expert, but I would explain all of these different types of adjectives and nouns, and all are not only meant for specifically male or female or privileged or not, or, able or unable. Of course, we've grown up in a society where that's what we know. But as we become more progressive and undo the stereotypes, we make it a little more liberated for all.
For me, I'm right now trying to undo the damage that the gender binary did to me as a child. I'm trying to ignore what I was told is for boys and what is for girls. For me, for my own self-expression, that means I don't shave my legs and things like that. And I also, because that a boy would never be asked to shave his legs. That's not a norm for boys. I also buy men's products and clothes because they're usually cheaper and better quality. And of course, I can't uninternalize the whole concept of the gender binary as quickly, but over the years, it's kind of undoing it for me.
To go off of that, what are some things we should tell the listeners to do to criticize or challenge these norms themselves?
Well, initially, you can probably make sure you're not being oppressed by these norms within your identities. And for yourself, maybe you truly never knew you were a being. You were morphing yourself into the segregated words, and now you can bring yourself to dress, act, and think the way you want to, not in a feminine or masculine way. Once you start with yourself, you're able to challenge them when you hear them and you're being oppressed by them in everyday lives.
Also, I think it's important to remember that so many parts of our pop culture are sexist, homophobic, racist. I could go on. The music industry is one that comes to mind, and it's important to criticize our culture as often as possible, but it's also important to remember that it's okay to be imperfect, or as Roxane Gay would say, a bad feminist, as long as you're trying to improve.
For me, I think that's something that everyone can try to look more into is the media, and specifically when we watch movies or TV shows. I think that it can be easy to only pay attention to its entertainment value, but I think that it's really important that we see what kind of roles are being given and by what kinds of people. If we aren't giving representation to various types of individuals, I think it can create a disconnect between how people see themselves or how they see others. And I think this can be true for not just race, but for people with different sexualities or abilities, people with different gender identities, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. And what are some techniques that we could share with listeners so that they become more inclusive within the youth?
For me, something that I found that I would really love to see a change in is the way that youth perspectives are viewed. Mm-hmm. I found that more than not, young people's opinions and ideas are disregarded, and I feel like that can really take away from new or different voices, and that could be reaching out to more people. I think that if we start to value the way that young people think and feel, we could really see a shift within the inclusivity of youth.
I think that people my age, or I've noticed that people my age really appreciate it when adults go out of their way to be inclusive with their language. So saying things like you all instead of you guys, people instead of boys, ladies and gentlemen, or boys and girls, or using gender neutral terms such as couples instead of husband and wife. Little things like that really matter to me and other young people.
Yeah, definitely making sure that you're expressing your voice as a youth, and in that way that is most comfortable and most confident for you, and have your peers that will listen to your voice, just basically being able to express yourself.
All right, that's all the time we have for today. You're one step closer to being the activist that you may want to be. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, a quote from Audre Lorde. Your silence will not protect you. Speak up and do it loud.
Bye.
Thank you.